Welcome to Playing With Inference. Today we're talking about using voice and the advances that Gen AI has brought to that space within games and bringing that kind of new fidelity to player experiences.
I'm excited that today our guest is Bart Krol, who comes from a very deep engineering background out of Poland in Europe. We actually crossed paths briefly at Riot. That was a big place many years ago. And most recently, Bart has been at a Combinator startup working on voice AI, and then started to thinking a little bit more about how we could apply that to games, particularly tabletop role-playing games. So we are going to enjoy talking to Bart here about this topic. It's one that I really care about, so I'm really excited.
Nice. I'm also super excited about it, so it's nice to be here.
Yeah, so before we jump into all the technical details that I know Aaron is dying to get to, maybe talk a little bit, we briefly talked about it in the intro, but talk a little bit about what sort of things sparked your interest as you were working at the Y Combinator startup and got you to think, maybe I want to go and apply this to games and really jump into that space, and has led you down the path you're currently following.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I think the biggest one was that I was maybe unaware how the voice AI is progressing. It was like first day, I went for a work trial working with them, and I used the application. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having an actual conversation with AI. And I was like, this is crazy, because the quality of voices that we were using from 11 Labs, they're also super amazing, and everything worked. And I was like, I'm having a real conversation. So after some time, I was like, you know what? I am playing role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games, D&D, for my whole life. And I was like, you know what? Maybe there's a lot of people who doesn't have a Dungeon Master, or maybe they want to try but are a little bit scared. So what if there was an app that they can actually play? And also the whole voice part was a little bit amazing. So when we were trying to solve some challenges working there, I felt like for the first time after a long time that I'm actually doing some engineering work. And by engineering, but I was actually trying to solve problems, because I was like, okay, so when a person is speaking, but AI needs to think a little bit more, we need to give some sort of a feedback. So how do we design this idea? But then this is a problem, and this is a problem. So I felt like I'm actually solving problems which weren't solved. And that also led to this idea, you know what, I want to do more and more of it. Yeah, excited we can talk today about it.
I'm wondering, so I want to start with, let's just talk about voice in general in AI, because one of the questions when we look at AI applications is, what's the right user interface? Or maybe there's multiple correct user interfaces. Certainly chat has been the initial way a lot of people have interfaced with the new forms of generative AI, including even when they're generating images, for example. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have use that kind of chat interface. For those that aren't as familiar with what's the state of voice AI, and why do you think it's a good user interface?
Oh, that's so one thing I definitely can answer. The second one, I'm gonna start with the second one. So interesting thing about the interface was that the company I was working for, Telly, they were using it as a phone interface. And then when you're calling someone, this is the only interface you have. So it led us to an idea of, okay, so there is a UX, user experience, but not like usual people think about putting things on screen. But now we have to figure out, what is the best experience, how to design it, when to talk, what pause is awkward, and what happens when people talk too fast, and what do you do, and so on. So that was fun. And I think we didn't explore it that much. So I think in those sorts of application, when you don't use your hands and this is the only way, that's the correct interface. I am struggling sometimes when I'm creating my own thing to figure out why would people talk usually. But I had some cool insights which are interesting. So couple friends, or couple people who use my application, they said that they tried playing this when they were driving a car. And I think maybe not in Europe, but in US, everyone spends a lot of time driving. So that could be something, sometimes you just want to talk with someone. So I guess in situations like this is a perfect interface, right? That would be answer to the second one. But the first one about the voice AI, I think because of Gen AI, all of the things that we were doing in terms of both voice generation and also transcribing are much, much better. So like we had tag to transcribe text to speech and to translate speech to text. But with Gen AI, now we can figure out when you are doing this, what kind of things were said, because there was always a problem. And I think this actually kicked off this whole branch in different direction. So yeah.
I think it's really interesting because there are absolutely sort of experience cases where I think users are used to only having their voice phone calls being at one, and you definitely see a lot of voice AI companies in the enterprise space pushing into that, like customer service, phone call, phone tree kind of stuff. But it's also, to your point, like when you're driving in a car, when you're doing sort of other things actively with your hands, voice becomes this thing that is not only convenient but expected. I know that there's another company that I'm completely spacing on their name that is doing, had already been doing stuff of games that are on like Alexa and these sorts of devices, and looking more at AI games where they really are looking at these games that you could play on the Internet of Things using your voice. And what's fascinating to me that we've watched play out just with natural language in the chat space is, as soon as you can do something in natural language, whether it's via text or via voice, it comes with all these like stuff you get for free of how people engage with it. They engage with it much more naturalistically. They actually start doing things like saying please and thank you and all these sorts of polite things that I think at one point Sam Altman was even like, please stop being polite to the bots. It's costing us money. It's one of those things where it's like you all this stuff comes for free with that can make it a really good user experience, but also can bring baggage. I know that's something that we definitely, not with on the voice side, but on the tech side, struggled with Retail Mage a little bit.
Yeah. I have one interesting comment about those like natural, like how people behave. So like we had one interesting problem that we wanted. So basically the interruptions and the turn detection is a big problem. And there's some algorithms, different people are trying different things. But so one thing which happened was that usually people when talking were like doing to the bot, and we were trying to not register those ahas as something that should change, stop, and we had some like a lot of words that should stop the flow. So for example, it said something like hang on, or like stop, or like wait, that should stop. But if someone said like that should be okay, the bot can carry on with talking. People are behaving very naturalistic to it. Sometimes they didn't even know that they are speaking with a bot. That was interesting. I was listening to those calls and I was like, it's pretty obvious, but okay.
I know that you mentioned like driving a car. I have done that. Like I have used the latest ChatGPT app sometimes and pulled it up and had a conversation with it while I was driving, partly because I am in Los Angeles and I will sometimes be driving. But I know other people would just do a voice memo and then they can like later transcribe it. It's like you're driving, you've got an idea, just tell Siri or something, take a voice memo. But one reason I thought it was interesting, some of it was just to try it, but what I would do is use the latest ChatGPT application with their more natural language voice, and I could have a bit of a conversation. And usually it was because I was actually trying to work. Like I have an idea, I have a document, or I've got something that I want to work on, and so I'm just going to say it out. We're gonna work on it together, so that when I do get back home, I basically already have a draft of this thing done or something like that. And I found it actually worked pretty well. There were some times when it was just as easy to talk my ideas out and then have a large language model make it a little more clear what I was saying. And I know of, and I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to remember which IDE has this video. I cannot recall if it's Cursor or Zed or one of them that has a coding agent. But I recall that one of their videos, as they were demoing it, the demoer would do voice, and I was like, "What are you doing?" Right? Because like I use like Claude Code and stuff like that, and I'm going to type it out. He's like, "No, the reason that he does voice is because he doesn't overthink what he's trying to tell the agent." Right? If he sits there, like he says, if you really want speed up, you just need to talk. Whereas if you sit there and try to write it, you're going to end up essentially like wordsmithing and editing the message you send and making sure it's all correct. At which point you may end up using as much time doing that as you get in the time savings of having an agent do some of the coding for you. And I have not taken his advice, but it has stuck with me for that example.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
When you're looking at, what do you anticipate the difference being from going from the experiences you've described before, which is we're on a phone or something, to being in a game? Have you done any experiments with that? What are you seeing? Do you think there'll be the same challenges or different challenges from a voice input side?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and all of those are like super interesting to me. So I can like tell you all about those because I find some of them like fascinating in a way that I wouldn't think that this is a problem, but it looks like it's a problem for most of the people. And then when I play, I'm like, okay, I understand why this is a problem. It still bothers me, but because it's not a problem. Because for example, what happens? The transcription model that I'm using, I'm using the Flash version, so just to be as fast as possible. So it sometimes makes mistakes. So and I decided, and I went back and forth with this, and I decided in the latest version to just show what player is saying, and sometimes it's transcribing completely wrong. But the LM then understand what's going on from the context because it's okay. You said something. I think I understand what's going on. I can still generate something. But players are super bothered that they are not understood correctly. So I went back and forth with this idea. So then now I'm like thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to add an edit button. So if they are super bothered, they can type it or change it or like say, no, do it once again and delete the last part just to be clear. But I figured that if I'm showing this to people, they are super bothered. But if I had one iteration when I wasn't showing the text, and everyone was like playing and no one cared what's going on because they were getting answers, but everyone was like, why can I see my text? And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So like this is one of the biggest issues I had. Another one which was very interesting, I had to tweak a lot of times because like with the conversation we are talking and it's normal that someone cuts you off or maybe like you're talking and then they start talking and then you can interrupt the bot. But with the game, the information is important. So like I had to like really think what would be the good experience to make sure that the player knows. Because like for example, someone would be like, I'm gonna try this, or actually, and they're thinking, and the bot started talking, the GM started talking, and they were like, no, I wanted to continue, I needed to think. So I added another button just to say, okay, I'm thinking. So like the turn detection, you can still play in your car, but if you like want to think, you can click somewhere, and now you can think a little bit more, and then you can continue, which is interesting because usually you would signal it somehow on video, be like, or something, and then
Right.
someone will not start. But since AI, it doesn't understand. I don't have a video yet. So I think there was also another interesting challenge, how to make sure to communicate the state of I'm thinking to the AI agent.
Yeah, I think I'm. I was actually impressed with how ChatGPT does it because it will let you pause for quite some time, but at some point
Mm-hmm.
it times out. I think it's 30 seconds or something like that. At some point it's okay, you've gone away. But that is it. Weirdly though, it makes me almost nervous when it's sitting there waiting because I'm like it's waiting. I need to say
Mm-hmm.
something. So you talked before about having ways to make sure communication's going back and forth, right? So that the play, like everything from like the LLM knowing that there's not the ums, but also just like when is it time to talk? Is this like a model issue? Is this just an application algorithm design issue? Is it a bit of both?
So it's definitely, so I'm not using the multimodal agent. I'm using the multimodal agent experience model,
Okay.
however you call it. So I have three parts, and this is because there's two approaches of doing voice AI. So one, you would do like some sort of multimodal agent, which both understands the voice part and the speech part, and then it generates the answer. But you can go like three pieces. So one would be having something which does speech to text. Then you send those things into another, like into LLM, which generates the answer. And then you take the answer to generate the output using text to speech. So basically what's happening, you have all those streams of information like going all around across the globe to like different places, and they are being transmitted. So because this whole pipeline is working, you need some sort of a way to understand when the user is and speaking, and like when to talk or when not to talk, or what happens when you interrupt, what pieces of information to retain or which you don't have to retain because the user interrupted. And this is definitely the algorithm issue, and I think it still hasn't been like fully solved because there's so many like different pieces. And also like for building a phone application, it's different than like the game component, because I don't actually want players to interrupt the GM, but I will let them like skip what the bot is saying. Like for example, we're playing Baldur's Gate and you're like, okay, I got what they are saying. I'm just gonna like skip because I want to go to the next one. So like this I want to retain, but not discarding all the context, because the context is still important because it says what's happening in the game.
It just so that we can make sure we have all the right mental image in our head when you're thinking about this. And my understanding is you have had a build and had multiple players through and people playing on them. Is it one player with the GM? Is it multiple players with the GM? Like, how is it structured?
So currently I am only supporting solo play, so it's one agent and one player. One of the issues is because the tech I'm using, which is called LiveKit, they for now only have this option to have one agent and one user. Weirdly, it's not because the tech doesn't allow it. It's just technically there are some like moving parts that it has to be solved to understanding like to which person how to answer, and like maybe to answer to all of them or to distinguish and what's going on and what's going on. I think technically it's not that difficult to solve. And also like the tech that I'm using is using WebRTC behind the scenes, so like adding people to the rooms, because the whole thing is based on the room. So you create a room, then the agent is joining, then the user is joining, so you could have multiple users. You only need some sort of technology to understand who is speaking right now and like when to speak, which can either be solved if two players are like sitting on two different computers, so they have two different like users, or most speech to text models currently also have those settings to understand which person is or who is talking right now, which is actually very interesting because I was doing a presentation and I was like, oh, this now can show the speakers. And someone from the room, like from the back of the room said, really, does it work? And then someone else said, and there was like person three, and they said something else. And I was like, oh my God, this is working very well. And I was mind blown, to be honest.
So yeah. I want to make sure I dive into that a little bit more, make sure I understand, because I think for those that are working in voice, are these mostly models that are services that you're running? Are they open weight models that you can run on your own? Let's just talk through some of the options and what you recommend for people getting started and like what they might have to do to finally get a product to work.
Yeah, so like I think it depends on different needs. So I think though there are already companies which provide those agents, like talking agents. So you can, I think 11 Labs has one. Deepgram also have one. Obviously, OpenAI. I think you can like maybe use it with the API. I would need to double check. But if you take it to the core of the experience, and this is what I was doing, I was using LiveKit as my orchestration layer for building the voice pipeline. So basically what it does, it takes like voice or like the audio frame by frame and sends it to different parts of the pipeline and then like change those things. And then you get the output. But basically I'm using as I was saying, three different services. So first you need to like take audio. So like my speech and transcribe it. So then you have a text, and then you take this text and you send it to your large language model. I'm using OpenAI for this. And I was using Whisper. Like right now I'm using Whisper transcribing. I also experimented with different other tools on the market. And so, yeah, so Whisper is transcribing, then text is going to OpenAI to GPT model. And then the generated part is going to 11 Labs, which provide the voice layer. And interesting thing, one thing which I'm doing, which is like not very standard, I'm actually doing the output from the LLM is structured. So like I'm saying like responses, GM, and then character one, like, I don't know, like run. And based on those tags, I'm generating different voices. So when you start the application, you can hear like different voices, but what is happening, the streams are being like, okay, open one stream to 11 labs with this voice ID, then stop it, then open it once another one. So there's a lot of API calls going all around.
Do you, I know with one challenge with some of these technologies can sometimes be the costs of running them, all those token costs and everything. Voice, at least for transcription, maybe for generation, but for transcription in particular, I know that at least I have considered and looked into, and I know a couple other folks have, of doing that potentially on device, whether that's on a mobile device or on a desktop like a PC. Is this something that you've explored yet? Do you think do you see this being something that can be run on device, on edge, or do you expect that the best models will still end up being like a cloud hosted service?
That's interesting. I think running this on device, and I also think maybe the OpenAI is doing this right, because like when you are transcribing, actually probably not, probably I'm not saying it right, no, but I think that it could be an option. The only thing which is like interesting, I think the best performance would be if all of those monitors are co-located in one place. So perfectly, if all of them could be on the device, so you had like all three together in one place, which I think would be maybe a little bit hard. It could be good for desktop. So for example, imagine like you have a voice AI application and you like download that maybe smaller models. It would be like, I don't know, maybe 200 gigabytes, but most games are also like that, I guess, nowadays, weirdly. So that would be okay. But yeah, I think the biggest part is collocation, because you need the shortest response from like when communicated with those. So even if you like have fast transcribing, you still have to send this text
Right.
to generate the answer, and then when generating the answer, you still have to generate the voice. The waiting time is more important than the application code. So like for all the programmers, that the same would be like, you don't really have to optimize your application layer if you have the database, because still database calls are super long. So if your application is doing fine, you don't have to like really optimize it until it's like very slow, then you have to optimize it. But the bottleneck is that sending the data all around.
When you were doing this for at the YC company, you mentioned all these interesting challenges of like when to interrupt and when not to interrupt and that kind of stuff, which, sounds like, at least in that use case, the latency was pretty short, right? Like
Oh
when
yeah.
it was being able to do that. I'm curious from the learnings there versus the games, right? Like, is there any particular approach that those companies are using that helps with the latency side of things? Because it said that, like, hey, the thing to worry about is the latency because it has to be transcribed and passed and stuff, and that's definitely, like, in games, latency is such a big consideration. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what were the big lessons you got along the way doing the sort of enterprise side of this on handling latency, especially with voice?
Yeah, so I think, so first I'm gonna maybe say something interesting in a way that the latency is also important in a way that I think, I don't remember how much it was, but I think it was like 600 milliseconds. If it's more than that, it feels weird. So until it's like less, then you are okay, but because it still feels like a conversation. But if it's like more, you're like, then the people on the phone will be like, "Hey, are you still there? What's going on? I don't understand." Because so we were experimenting with an idea like how to make maybe give the user a feeling that everything is like working. So for example, maybe doing something like playing some kind of a sound that maybe like a keyboard sound. So like it's still thinking and it's still generating, but at least there's like someone is, and you hear the keyboard sounds of the person on the phone is okay, something is going on. It's not broken. So
They're
we're
still
experimenting
breathing
with those.
almost.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Another thing which was very interesting, because since with I think the biggest issue was generating the answer. So we were trying to figure out what can we do to improve it. We had a couple ideas. When I was there, we didn't go with any of those because we didn't have time because there were other things. But three things that we are trying to maybe try to tackle. So one would be to do a sliding window context. So basically, when the context grows, maybe we can summarize the start of the conversation because it isn't that much important, and do it in the background so you can like swap the context and then have a shorter context window. So then make sure that the generation part will be much faster. So that was one idea. Another one was like, okay, so if OpenAI is slow and we don't have a control over it, and since the generation part will take some time, what if we do free calls to the OpenAI and take the one which is the fastest? I guess it's because it was YC company and they have a lot of money, so they could do a lot of those. I wouldn't do it, but that was one of the ideas. Yeah, so like a sliding window, then this, and then I think if you are enterprise enough, most of those models, which was like very interesting to me, it's because I didn't know how this really works. They said that they can maybe give you the model so you're install it on premise and they give you like all the information, but first you have to go through like NDA documents and say that like it's so I think DeepGram was offering this. So if we really wanted, we could have a infrastructure somewhere like either on the servers, or we could have this infrastructure on our own premise, and then it would be much faster. So there would be free strategies to make it work a little bit faster.
I find it amusing, I think is the right term, somewhere between amusing and interesting, that like there we do have all these very human characters. So like you said, like if it goes longer than 600 milliseconds, then we start to get weirded out and stuff. But also that we're okay with sounds of, to your point, like, oh, just play this keyboard and someone breathing slightly or whatever, right? But there's going into all sorts of like human interaction stuff. Like I can see, hey, send one call out to get the full response, but then maybe even a small model or a pre-baked set of things of, hey, here's a little interstitial thing that you can say while it's generating the larger thing, right? That buys you the time to generate the larger piece, that kind of stuff. And then I just get into then if you want to build an active listening bot, then you have the one that very quickly says, what I'm hearing from you is, and it just re-summarizes what it heard while it waits for the full response to come back, kind of thing. And
yeah.
all sorts of tactics.
Yeah, if you haven't checked out some of the latest speech models, like what ChatGPT can do or 11 Labs, like there's some very natural sounding language that can be generated that can be quite surprising the first time. I know I have so good, it tends to sometimes like unnerve people the first time they hear it. Had my wife and one of our friends one time, I sat it down and said, like, yeah, you can just talk to it. Oh, and my daughter too. Yeah, my daughter who's in college, she like hated it. She's no, this is too weird. This is too realistic. But a lot of it are the things that if you look, there's a bunch of enhancements, but some of those enhancements are better, including pauses, including fluctuations in the speech, including emphasis, adding in us and things like that that make it sound much more natural. For example, the and I want to come back, Bart, because I'm curious on this part, because let's say you ask the exact same question, and I'm going to use ChatGPT as an example, right? But if you had ChatGPT and you use the exact same question that you put into chat versus say the exact same words in the voice, you will get different responses, whether it's you're doing the voice mode or the text mode, not just based off of just some temperature, but on the fact that if the information is the same, I don't know, you're trying to ask some question about something about a city or New York or a book, like give me a book review. The fundamental content that the model may come back with may be identical, but the presentation, the tone and language of it can be stylized for a verbal reading versus verbal language versus I'm going to read it, which means it's not enough to just say, this is what I'm coming back to. It's not necessarily enough to just be like, I'm just going to have a large language model output whatever it would do and send that back, because it could output something that is really sounds right if you read it, but does not sound right if you were to say it. How do you, I'm assuming you see that problem. Is it a problem? How do you solve it? Is it just prompt engineering? Are there specific models? What do you do?
I think it was mostly prompt engineering. So it all starts like the first part is you are a voice AI agent talking naturally with the user, and it actually solves like many issues. It's still sometimes like it will generate a list, so you have to say no lists. People like maybe they do lists, but it's weird when it says one, you can do this, two. It's very weird. But
Right.
anyhow,
They
and then
start
and
saying
then
M dashes out loud.
oh yeah, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is one, but also like I am very not surprised, like I am amazed by what Eleven Labs is doing. Because like I'm still trying to find a cheaper competitor, but I cannot because they are so good. And also I don't know if you guys saw the V3 announcement that they did. I was using it. So basically it like can giggle, laugh, it can like have different accents, or like it can distinguish between whispering or like asking or like shouting, and like
Hmm.
they have those tags that they add to the text. For now it's not real time yet, so you can only generate it and then like play it out. So maybe if I had a version of an app like this that could work. But this is amazing, and it actually sounds like humans. And I'm like, and also what is interesting, so most of those models, I don't know what they do, but basically they say to always like, if you like chop your messages into like couple like parts, they say to always give you what was the previous context, because they will generate a different sort of answer based on what was said before. And also, funny enough, when I was starting, so now I have character voices, but when things were in like quotation marks, they like the game master was like role playing. So he was like, oh, so you are here and then you see this person, and then he was like, and the person says hello stranger, and I was like, what the hell is happening? It was just doing that, and I was like, whoa. So yeah, so I think those better models can also like figure out from the context what how they should say things. Yeah.
One that I've kept an eye on a bit, I'm not sure if it's hit your radar, is Sesame. Are you familiar with that technology model?
Mm.
I know that they have they had some really amazing demos. I think their tech, I'm not sure if it's publicly available yet. I think or it's like limited release on it, but someone may correct me if I'm wrong on it. Are there any other newer technologies you're keeping an eye on that aren't yet like either papers you've seen or things you've heard on Hugging Face or somewhere else that you're like, you're not using it yet, but you're keeping an eye on a particular approach?
I think Resemble AI is a competitor, and they also open source their model, which is interesting. I also think because like I'm keeping track on those like Reddit posts, and everyone is like, how Evan Labs is doing that, and there's like compromise that they are using a, it was called tortoise, I think tortoise. I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
pronouncing it wrong, like a animal, and that's like a model that they trained, and basically they did some magic to train it. So and everyone says like it does the best. So if you can train it on your own PC as well, it should also be the best. But it's not the fastest. So they did something smart for it to be the like to work in real time. So it's interesting what they did, but no one else did the same thing. So yeah, so like in the generation part, I'm not sure. In the transcribing, there's a lot of approaches, and weirdly, I found that I was good with Whisper, but I was very
Mm-hmm.
surprised because like we also had some troubles, and also it's language dependent sometimes. So for example, in the YC company, we're like, okay, different models are better with different languages, and we are not sure. And also, like for example, there's a company called Speechmatics which do real time, and they do really well. But also the latency sometimes is a little bit slower. So we're like, how much latency can we try for accuracy? So there's also an
Right.
interesting problem because like sometimes you want to be fast and you know that sometimes it will be wrong, but it's okay. But sometimes you don't want it to be that wrong. So, yeah,
This
that's
is a
hard.
very common trade-off. It's as simple as that for anyone who's been working in AI lately, unlike a large language model, it's the difference between, do I use a frontier model or do I use the nano version of it, right? The
Mm,
nano version is going to come back really fast, might be accurate, might not be, compared to the
yeah.
larger model. And so there are a lot of these type of trade-offs right now where you have to determine accuracy and latency. Um, I wanted to ask another question that's a little is in this voice space, and I'm
Hmm.
curious if it was something that came up at the prior startup or in your experience so far, there are a number of different ways the creative community has approached voice generation in a number of different ways. Some folks are concerned about it. Other folks, you can have adopted opportunities to license voices. There's been conversations around that, particularly in the video game industry. I'm curious when you say you're doing voice, do people ask you about this question? And what's your response? What do you see as working or should be concerned about?
Interesting. So I think it spawned the big conversation, and also I was thinking like, since I'm doing role playing games, maybe if I had like a lot of money and like big funding, maybe I could go to Matt Mercer, who is like he's
Right.
running Critical Role,
Yep.
the most known, and I was like, maybe I can ask him to like clone his voice, but then everyone I talked to it, no, he will not do it, and I'm like, I understand. He's like, this is an important thing, like this is his asset, so I understand he will not clone it. I think you can still like, so like for 11 labs you need, when I was cloning my own voice just for fun, I had to like provide 2 hours of audio content, and then they asked me to say a thing on the screen with my voice to confirm that actually I am the person. So like, but with open source models, you can clone, and it's like
Right.
dodgy and tricky, and I fully understand that. But I'm only using the voices that are provided either on the 11 Labs website. And interesting, there's all the rules like how long the voice can be there, and when you are putting your voice, you are signing like that you can keep this voice for 2 years, and then after 2 years you can take it off or something. But I'm doing something else which is interesting. Recently with Elven Labs v3, they gave me an option to generate voices. So you can say, I want a voice of a raspy person who is tired and something, and should be like a goblin and whatever, and I'm using the prompt to generate the voice, and I'm using that voice, which is I think they train it on many different voices, so you cannot really say who owns the voice. So now they cannot take it back, and also I don't like it would be hard to understand what's the intellectual property of this voice, because it was trained on so many. So this is what I'm doing, but I have to say, and this would be like another thing, that when I shown the app to a community on Reddit, everyone was super concerned, and also like very, how to say it, vocal about what's going on, because like they were like, AI is bad, AI killed your mom, you shouldn't be using AI. This is first comment that I got was like, kill yourself or something. I was very surprised because I was unaware that it is such a big problem. So I think we will need at some point some sort of like ideas how to make sure that some apps maybe are a little bit dodgy, but some apps are doing with all the resources that are, I don't know, like they have rights to. So for example, if you are using a voice that someone gave you rights to, it should be okay. No one should be bothered by it. But maybe other options would be bad. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in the entertainment space, right, there's so much associated with voices, like
Mm-hmm.
from an acting perspective, and like we've had
Yeah.
for a long time in the game industry, we've had these voice actors that have risen to prominence and sought after for different roles and that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is like in spaces where, especially when you think about tabletop role playing games and the idea that, oh, this is a game and an adventure that you can push in any direction, where it becomes more improv like. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really what a lot of these actual plays have shown off, is how, despite many of their fans being like, wait, did you script all this out? It's like, no, 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 it's all improv, right? This kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you can't really hire a voice actor to sit on inside your server to be ready to give voice to any line. And so I think it'll be this interesting thing that this new form of game and form of entertainment will swim against the grain a little bit on some of these norms, but will carve out its own. And to your point, it's about what is the new respect for rules of this form of art that couldn't be done before, but we still have to find a way to honor all the pieces as we go through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. On that note, there are many of us in the game industry that are interested because we are creators as well, and we want to value, we like creating games, we like creating entertainment, we try to respect. I've worked with so many artists and voice artists and other creatives over the years, and I value their contributions. So usually, a lot of us who are exploring this space, not all, but many of us, and I'd like to think particularly JM&T and many of the others that we've worked with, are particularly focused on what Ramon and I were talking about before, like games that just couldn't be created without this technology. Meaning, I'm not just using it to say I cloned Minecraft or I cloned Baldur's Gate. It's no, here's an experience that without this technology, I could never have done it before. And I think that's what we're excited about. And we've had synthesized voices before. This is not like the first time that we've ever been able to synthesize speech. I think the question is usually also on whatever that training data was. How was that training data sourced? And were the people whose work was included? Was it included in a? And we have to distinguish between both a legal and ethical way, because it may be legal, it may or may not be ethical. I think it's going to evolve over time. I think that we will see ways in which artists can be compensated, but I also recognize that there are things here where, yeah, like we couldn't create this technology without do this any other way, right? It's not like I'm replacing a voice actor per se, but if voice actors came in as part of it or other tech part of it, I think as an industry there's a number of different ways that are being explored of like how do we try to find some way to compensate or identify those original source materials. We have spent a lot of the time talking about voice because we haven't usually talked about voice, and it's an area that I think is fascinating because I know, before we move off from it, the last part of that is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it is that, like, for Retail Mage, we do actually have the game that we build. We do actually have voice input. Not many players use it, but that's kind of because it's more presented and more obvious that you can type. And while typing is an okay input, I'm not sure that is the future for AI games, to be honest. Maybe there'll always be a place for it. Maybe, I don't know. But I'd be surprised if the future of AI games typing is the primary way you input. Now, I'm also not sure if voice will be the only way. It'll probably be a couple multimodal, but I could see voice being a component. Maybe not playing a mobile phone game on the plane with my voice, but in some places, I think it could do it. So I've been just really interested in that exploration. But in addition to voice, we are talking about games. And you are not only trying to solve some voice problems, you're trying to solve some game problems. So let's talk about that a little bit. There's a lot of folks who, when they saw ChatGPT early on, or even earlier versions of GPT and LLMs, like if we go to what Nick did with AI Dungeon, one of the first ideas is, can I play Dungeons and Dragons with this thing? A lot of folks have made some attempts. You're making an attempt with Tabletop. I'm curious, what do you think? Is it easy? Can you just play D&D with these? Does it work just right? Does not work right away, right? So what are you finding in trying to build that? Like, what are the challenges? What seems to work for you?
Yeah, so answer no, you cannot just play D&D with it. I think there's a lot of different moving pieces and all of them are super interesting. And I was thinking about them, like I'm spending, like this is the most time I'm spending like thinking about this. So I'm super happy to talk about it. One of the things, so I don't even know where to start, but let's say from the beginning. So like, I think that most people are like, you know what, I'm just going to play Dungeons and Dragons with ChatGPT. So they're like, run me, and it works. And I think it works in a way that you can play D&D. People are doing this, so it works. But then, first of all, like it will hallucinate rules, it will hallucinate everything, it will forget what was happening, and also you don't have the game system. So like the big part, I think, of playing D&D as well, because D&D is experience when you like talk, but also it's a game, and people like the game part. So like what I'm also building and experimenting is how to like interact, like how to plug a good system with the agent. So like using the tool calls, it will generate roles, and based on those roles, it will do the story in different ways. For example, one of the things is that ChatGPT likes to agree with a user. So like whatever happens, it's like, yes, I'll do it. So first I had to protect against that, because like many people were like, there's a game, I can do whatever. I'm gonna break the rules because I love
Yep.
it. I'm gonna take a bazooka and shoot at this orc, and so now I had to say no bazookas. No, you cannot do it. And also I have to do it in a way that it would be like, sometimes I'm trying to like instruct with prompt engineering the agent to say that would be an amazing idea if you had a bazooka, but you don't. So like, how do you want to try to solve it? So I'm trying to play it off a little bit. So no, we are not doing this here. People still are finding a ways around it, because the problem with it is you have like infinite possibilities, and you want to give this infinite possibilities for a player, but also you want to restrict some of the ideas because it's not fun. And usually when you play with your friends, sometimes it also happens people are like not behaving as as their character, so they are like murder hobos, and it's hard to solve like with real game master. It's also hard to solve with LLM Game Master, but at least a lot of us are like protecting how to make sure that players are not abusing that. But then, like how to also make sure that when there is a consequence of failed role, there's something interesting is happening. So like teaching with with prompting, and also like with generating. So like I have a system to like generate some consequences of the bad role, just to feed the LLM to have like ideas how to generate something which will move story forward. So that's a lot of thinking, like how to make sure that each answer is also pushing story a little bit forward. So that's another issue, which is a very interesting thing to solve. And lastly, one thing which so I think with D&D, and this is like the biggest thing which I'm trying to solve, is what is D and why are you playing? Like there's multiple answers why you want to play. So like, for example, some competitors are playing with, you can generate a world and you can live in this world. I'm more thinking about the story. So how can you make a story? My unit of fun is an adventure. An adventure should have a beginning and then it should end. So I'm trying to figure out how to chop the adventure into like chapters and make sure that you can switch the prompt in between those chapters to make sure that it will have a different feel, it will lead somewhere. But since players can do whatever, you have to be smart about it. And this is like what I'm trying to think, like when to switch the prompt, when the chapter finishes, when it starts, like how to go around it. I think all of those things are fascinating, and I'm happy to like talk with you. And maybe you have some ideas, because like we can explore some ideas together. Because yeah, those are the most things that I'm having issues and like experimenting right now.
I think there's a breadth of issues, exactly as you brought out, of like when you think about just the game of D and all the different people it could be for, and all the things that each of those people want, and then how to technically solve them, right? Like it's just a cascade of like interesting challenges. But what I come back to, that I'm curious how you think about this stuff. Who is your audience that you're really hyper targeting? Is it audio D&D for literally anyone, everyone from Matt, you hope Matt Mercer plays it, to baby's first D&D game, right? Because having to span that big of an audience can be challenging, right? Whereas I think very early in our conversation, you said, oh, yeah, people who maybe don't have a DM or are afraid to try. And so maybe this is a game that they can play in their car just to try out role playing. And I think having that very particular audience, like if we just zero in on that, it simplifies some of those problems but complicates others. Because certainly for a person's first D&D game, you want to offer them the promise of they can do anything. But compared to a seasoned D&D player, they are less likely to actually do anything, and maybe they actually want a little bit more of a railroaded adventure, because part of the challenge is they want to be able to baby step into that creativity and be guided there versus just be dropped in the deep end. And that presents opportunity and challenge. And so I'm curious, do you have a sense of this is who I'm really building it for? Or are you still feeling that out as you build?
So I'm still figuring this out as I'm building, because like pre-product market fit, I would say. But like initially, my target was like people who want to try, maybe who don't have a group or a game master, because it is hard sometimes to find like a good group, and it takes some time to, or some people are shy, or maybe they just want to, they watch Matt Mercer, they'll be like, I want to try that, but finding 5 different nerds and going to their house, it's weird. So maybe I'm not gonna do that. And yeah, so I was thinking that those could be my perfect audience in the beginning. So yes, but there are challenges, as you said, because like, for example, I gave this app to my mom, who doesn't play D&D, and she was like, I don't know what I should be doing. And I'm like, you can do whatever. That was interesting, because that also needs to be overcome in some way, to like maybe nudge people in some direction and ask them more leading questions, as you could do this, or you could maybe do that. But then then you have to like maybe at some point turn off the like helping DM and change the prompt on the fly. But I think one thing which I find interesting is that this changing the prompt on the fly depending on what's happening is very interesting, as in you can literally like change the whole experience based on what's happening, and you can adapt the experience as you go and add more things, remove some things, and the agent will behave in a different way. And I find this as an interesting like UX problem, and I think in future games people may use it, because like I imagine that there would be like a Clippy from Word in some games, and there will be AI, and it will be helping the players, but it will learn as fast as what's happening, and it will only appear when it's necessary, for example. And I find this as an interesting like thing that this technology gives us option to try.
I'm curious if I hadn't thought of this to begin with. So first off, it's dangerous to have this topic towards the end of our podcast, because as Carl knows, tabletop role playing games are arguably my first love, even more than any other video games and board games. And I have many of those, or miniature games and things like that. But tabletop role playing games, if I had to give up all the other hobbies, that would be one of probably the last to go. And so two thoughts I had while you were going. First is that we talk about D&D, but obviously there are many different rule systems. And one observation that I'm still thinking about it, but I think I may have learned something over the last year, is that what makes for a good rule experience on the table does not necessarily make for a good rule system for a large language model. The example that I've given to people lately has been, there's a form of tabletop role-play games that tend to be grouped together called like old school Renaissance, which tend to be like, look at a kind of a older school of role-playing. And the unique thing in those is that they put a lot of emphasis on the game master, dungeon master, or judge, or referee, right? Where in fact, they are often rules light because they are relying on the human. Now, there's a lot that resonates with me, and I think with, many players, not all players, but many players. And you'd think that if you have this really smart AI, that would be the right thing to do. But in my experience, what I find is that I get further when I think around rule systems that provide more specific rules and guidance, right? That in fact, giving too much agency to that dungeon master is maybe not the first place to start. And so other rule systems that maybe some players may not like on the table, but have more constraints on the judge, on the game master, have more rules essentially for the game master, can actually help and get a better experience by guiding the large language model, by guiding an AI. I'm curious if you've explored different rule systems. Does that line up with anything you've seen or your own intuition?
Yeah, I like this question, because I sometimes make fun that for some reason, mostly for people, when they talk about tabletop role-playing games, they use like D&D as like the experience. So my favorite games are of this like indie games from the genre called Powered by the Apocalypse. They all started with
fantastic group of games. Yes.
Yeah, I love them. So like the very interesting thing, and this is why I used them in the beginning. Now I changed the system a little bit to simplify it. But in the beginning, I used them because they use this idea of moves. And the moves are like, when you do X, something happens. So like when you talk, when you hit someone, when you talk with someone, when you try to do that. And I found that for LLMs, it was very easy to understand when this happens, then do a this tool call, and then this was doing all
Yep.
sorts of mechanics from this move. And I structured basically the whole experience in the beginning, basing this on Dungeon Word, or like a hack from
Yep.
Dungeon Word called Homebrew Word, which I really like. So I used that as the starting point, and it worked surprisingly very well. It could understand most of the times, and also like my friend gave me feedback that he was like surprised that it works when it should work, but sometimes it wasn't triggering a move, but it was the same situation when he wouldn't be triggering a move. And I was like, okay, I'm surprised that it actually works. But this was his experience. So yeah, so I found those a little bit better. But then, funny enough, because we were talking about voice, I was like, because like in the beginning, I was like translating the whole thing. And for example, in this word, when you like discern reality, so like you look around, it asks you questions, and those are the things that you as the player would like to know to move the story forward, because you'll find those the most interesting. And I also found that it works well with LLM. But then I was like, I had a pop-up and people were clicking, and I had like some people were like, this sort of breaks the experience because you're talking with an app and then you're clicking and it's kind of weird, but like maybe listing 7 things from the GM would be weird. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do it for now. So like I'm still experimenting how to present it the best way. Probably I'll go back at some point, but I found those rules to be working very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Powered by the Apocalypse, I think for those that are interested in this space, if you're interested in tabletop role playing games in general and you've not played a Powered by the Apocalypse game, I would encourage you to do. I also think that it's a good place to experiment here more than just straight up like I'm going to grab some version of 5th edition D&D or other D&D. I think Powered by the Apocalypse is a great place to start. And there are a lot of good examples. Dungeon World is a good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of good examples out there that I think have mechanics that lean in towards what a large language model can do well. Just out of curiosity, and this is actually based on what Carl had said, because then I started thinking about it, there is a whole increasingly popular, I maybe it because it was existed before the pandemic, but definitely since the pandemic, of like solo RPGs. Mm-hmm. And Ironsworn or Starforged are
good ones.
Yes, and one of the reasons that I've looked into those is because if you're thinking about how you would build an AI dungeon master, when you're looking at a solo RPG, you essentially have the rules for what it wants a dungeon master or game master should to do. Isn't part of it. And so I think that's another area, not only from the player experience point of view of, oh, this is a solo experience, what would a solo experience be like? Ironsworn, Starforged are good examples, but I think even just the rule set gives folks ideas of what should the dungeon master even be doing. You know, and Powered by the Apocalypse has like agendas and stuff like that are similar concepts.
Yeah, Ironsworn is like amazing system, and they did amazing work with it. I was thinking maybe I'm just gonna port Ironsworn. Then I looked at all the rules and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I need to think about it. Maybe you're gonna start with something a little bit easier. One thing which I was thinking to experiment maybe next week if I have time. So I went into solo RPG subreddit, which is also very interesting. There's 55,000 people, and interestingly, like everyone plays a little bit differently. They value different things. Yep. But one thing which is very popular is called Mythic, which is which is called a Game Master emulator.
Yes.
And I read it and I was like, I think I can maybe take some of the ideas, because they have the idea of like how to do a scene and what is important in a scene, but also maybe you can have one number which will change the random generation and like questions. So like what I could do, I could use Mythic to like generate those scenes and give them like, because there's this like tracker which says if you're late in the session, like a lot of time passed, you should be going to the climax. So this number will be bigger. I don't remember what it was like. I think it was chaos factor or something like this. So I could have factor for my LLM GM, so things will be progressing much faster. And I think that they have like amazing ideas there. And I'm thinking to like try to port some of those ideas into those tool calls and try to like also generate the context based on it and generate those answers differently. So yeah, I think this is very interesting.
Yeah, Mythic is a great system, which has recently had a revision not that long ago and has a lot of really good content. So yeah, you can get away with, I think, like we said, a lot of people started out by just first time they use ChatGPT or one of the others is I'm going to try to play it, and it does better than you would expect, particularly given that none of this stuff seemed like it should. Still mind blowing that any of it works at all. But yeah, I think that you're going to have issues around to really be able to play a game. It has to stay. There's a lot of work, as you've been pointing out, of getting it to the point that it stays consistent, coherent, maintains pacing, maintains state, keeps the rules going. A fireball at the beginning of the game should be roughly equivalent to a fireball at the end of the game, and you shouldn't have new surprises. It is a bit of a challenge, but I'm really excited to see as some of these games come out how people solve these problems.
I also think, as I was saying, like it's hard to define what role-playing game is. So for example, if you look at Powered by the Apocalypse, it's better for like improvisation. But when we mentioned OSR, old school gaming or old school Renaissance, those are more based on locations, and the whole idea is that you can win an adventure, as in like you go with your adventure and you like go to dungeons and you need gold to have XP, and then you can progress in the world and you can build a castle and all of those. And those are amazing as well. But also like it's a little bit different experience. You want something to be like concrete. So I also started with this idea to make sure that the adventure is written by human. Because I was like, my assumption right now, which I'm trying to validate, is that LLMs are great in, so I'm providing the skeleton of an adventure. And then it's a question how to chain the stories together. And for example, like one of the person who I really like to read, Alexandrian, Justin Alexander, he wrote a thing which is called 5-Node Mystery. And it's basically how to chain different scenes together if you're like trying to find like the plot. Or how, if you have dungeon, it's easy because like you can chain it by rooms. So I'm experimenting with this as well. So running a dungeon should be easier because then you can like change parts of the scenes. And all of those, I think there's a lot of those pieces that you have to figure out, okay, how the dungeon will look like with pacing, and like how to like what is important and how to teach LLM to understand how to play D&D. So yeah,
his book So You Want to Be a Game Master is really good. Great set of articles that he's got on for his website too.
Cool.
Amazing. It's been a whirlwind of a chat, but we are unfortunately running out of time for the episode. If folks are super interested in what you're working on and maybe some of the stuff that you shared here, do you have a website they could go to or any way that they should get in contact with you if they want to ask questions?
Of course, you can go to immersiveplay.io, which is a website for the app and for the game. Also, you can find me on YouTube, also on Immersive Play, and then some other social medias. If not, you can like look for me, Bart Krol, and I should be, if I'm summoned, I will answer.
They just need to say your name 3 times in Discord somewhere and suddenly you'll show up.
Probably.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode and sharing all your experiences. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the full episode. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. It would help us out a ton if you subscribed to the show on your platform of choice, as well as shared it with folks you think would find it useful. You can always check out playingwithinference.com to get in contact with us, join our Discord, or just find the links to the episodes. See you next week.